Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Joel Garbon. He has worked for more than 35 years as an international industrial science consultant and educator, and is the inventor of several commercially successful technologies. He is the president emeritus of the nonprofit New Energy Movement and co-author of the award-winning book Breakthrough Power: How Quantum Leap New Energy Inventions Can Transform Our World, which chronicles the challenges, opportunities, and progress in the new energy technology field. Joel, welcome. How are you tonight?
Hey, great, Chris. Happy to be here with you.
Well, welcome. Tonight's going to be fascinating because we're going to be discussing a little bit of a new topic for you, and it's based on your research into the famous Urantia book. And you're going to be presenting this also at the upcoming UFO Mega Conference in Laughlin, Nevada this February. First, let's get more about you and your background and, what eventually brought you to this research.
Okay. Well, professionally, I'm a scientist, and my work has been in the industrial science field as a consultant, mostly to the chemical industry, pulp and paper industry, and water treatment industries. And I travel around to various nations over the last 35 years doing consulting to help the folks in those fields, particularly the engineers, help them optimize their processes. And along the way, I had learned quite a few things that gave insight to some new technologies that I was able to invent that's contributed some good things to those fields. So that's been very satisfying. But I guess kind of on a more fundamental level, I'll give you some idea of my background. So I grew up in a very large family, a farm family outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, raised in a very devout Catholic family. Had some interesting experiences as a youth. When I was in my, I'd say 12, 13 years old, in the early 1970s, my family had a sighting, a very significant sighting of a UFO on our farm. It lasted for probably 20 minutes. It was like a cluster of these very bright colored objects that they hung up there in the sky for a while, and then they separated into these individual spheres, stayed like that for a little bit, then they all departed in different directions very quickly. It was really an amazing experience. And at that time in the Ohio Valley, there were lots of UFO sightings being reported. In fact, even on the front page of the newspapers, a lot of these accounts were being given. So there was a real UFO flap going on at the time. And that kind of stimulated some of my interest in this, although I would say that interest was submerged for quite some time. Then later it was probably my junior year in high school, I was involved in a very severe car accident that basically looked like it was going to take my life. And I had what you would call a near-death experience and a full life review that went along with that. That was really traumatizing to me. And I really couldn't make sense of it. Tried to talk to my parents about it, but it wasn't coming out right, or they were dismissive of it. And I just had to kind of bury this thing in me for quite some time. And, later as an adult, and I would say probably around the late 90s, I started to really get some impulses to start investigating some of these fields more extensively, including more interest in the ufology field, and also breakthrough energy technologies, and also an intense interest in world religions. And what are some of the real big questions, and how are we addressing those right now? And isn't there a better way to know what the universe really is made of, how it came about, where it's going, what our destiny is? I was very unsatisfied with what I had found in my life to that point, where, being educated, as I said, in a devout Catholic family, which I really appreciated because there was a lot of really great stuff in there. And I do have a lot of respect for Catholicism. But there were a number of these big questions about origins and history and destiny that were not addressed well there. And I found that really none of the conventional religions on our planet does a good job of addressing these and other big questions in a way that is really complete, coherent, and consistent. There's just so many gaps. And I think anyone who really studies religion at all, and oftentimes folks become quite disenchanted because these basic impulses to know, the search for truth and understanding, oftentimes just cannot be satisfactorily addressed by these religions, and people oftentimes will fall away as a result. And I think we're seeing that in droves now with the younger people today. I would say in your generation, Chris, my observation has been that the churches largely are empty of the younger people. And I think a lot of it is because, hey, young folks are asking the hard questions and they want to have answers, and they're entitled to those answers. Just like I had that thirst for understanding and truth, and I haven't found it in mainstream religion. So my mind has always been very open since undertaking this journey to try to see if there are other sources of information that might explain this in greater depth. That led to some interesting experiences along this kind of blended path of ufology, energy science, and interest in religion and metaphysics. So in I would say about 1992, I was introduced to a book that's fairly well known called A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles was very profound in my experience, and it really opened up something inside me that shifted what I would call my own spiritual perception, and where I was having a lot of personally profound mystical experiences happening that I don't, didn't speak too much of to anyone else, and really never had any need for anyone else to believe it or confirm it in any way, because what I was experiencing myself was so profound and impactful, and was resulting in a transformation in my own life, where I really felt like, I felt like things were making more sense, and I felt like I was becoming better as a parent. I'm the father of 2 daughters. I think I was becoming a better friend, a better man, all these things. It was very tangible, the fruits of what were going on in this investigation. And so that particular book, A Course in Miracles, and the application of what it teaches was very, very helpful to me. Then a little bit later, I had become pretty closely associated in the early, the beginnings of the Disclosure Project that many of your listeners would be familiar with. That's Dr. Stephen Greer's a group, and all the activity he's organized around the education about ufology. And I had a lot of good interactions with other people associated with that, and some real learning experiences there. A few years later, as I had come to also be closely associated with the E. Seti Ranch, James Gilliland's ranch, and I've been there many, many dozens of times over the years. Well, going back to around 2004, while I was up there, and I was very familiar with the grounds at that time, but it was late at night. I just, kind of happened to be walking along this area, and there wasn't anybody around, really just kind of some, large trees and bushes. And I heard these 2 male voices speaking. And as I got up close, just walking by, I heard one of them say to the other, "Have you ever read A Course in Miracles?" Well, that immediately grabbed my attention because, as I mentioned, that the study and practice of A Course in Miracles been such a profound impact on me. So I immediately just stopped and listened very carefully. And then the other male voice said, yeah, that's really great. Have you ever read the Urantia book? And I thought, what a peculiar name. And I really noted it like that. And the other said something very confirmative about, yeah, that's something valuable about that book. And then I just moved on. But that question, have you ever read the Urantia book? It really stuck with me. And the next day I went to see, where that area was, where these two voices were. And really all that's there is just these really tangled bushes. It's not where any people would hang out to have a discussion, because this is right, I don't know, probably 50 yards or so from where most people gather out in the sky watching field there at the East City Ranch. But this was a kind of not at all place where you would expect to find two men late at night, where you can't hardly see your hand in front of your face because it's so dark. So I didn't know what that all meant, but all I knew was that some type of message had been given. I followed up by getting a copy of the Urantia book, and I started to read it. And very quickly, I was impressed by the quality of the information that was in there. Now, I'll let you know, I study a lot of science topics, had studied comparative religions for a long time. And generally, I'm reading things that are fairly heady information. I don't read, beach romances and that type of thing. I'm usually reading some stuff that's, requires some rigor, okay? And one of the things that I immediately noticed in the Urantia book was the level at which the writing was stated is at least a collegiate, maybe even a master's level through quite a bit of it. And it was extremely consistent and comprehensive, and what I would say is coherent regarding a wide range of topics that overall harmonize science and philosophy and religion. And it's a thick book, maybe 2,000 pages or so, and goes into so much startling detail about each of those topics, science, philosophy, and religion, that I just could not fathom this coming from human sources. And indeed, there is no claim for human authorship. The claim is that there's a commission of celestial personalities from various planets who came together to communicate this information to our planet in the 1920s to the mid-30s. And which, at that time, we were in between World War I and World War II. But very interestingly, we were also right in the midst of all these advances in nuclear physics, the 1920s and 1930s. Well, what's an implication there? Well, obviously, what we see, a decade later, is we've got nuclear weapons on this planet. And we all know those who follow the ufology field, there are so many accounts of contact experiences or observations of UFOs around nuclear facilities, things like this, or supposed communications to contactees where the beings express this very deep and dire concern about our planet's unwise use of technology, including, nuclear physics, because of our destructive capacities that we've developed with it. So it's very interesting about the timing when the Urantia book information came along, because it was in advance of what became well known as the Roswell incident and so many of these other incidents there. So very, very interesting. So I'll just kind of leave it at that right now, and you and I talk a little more.
Now, the origins of the Urantia book is very mysterious. I know there's no real known author. Have you been able to do any more research into the origins of the book?
Well, I have gone back to the headquarters of where the Urantia Foundation is located. So the book itself, as I said, the information was communicated to a small group of doctors and their associates in the 1920s up to about 1935. And they had formed quite a large, what they called a forum of individuals from a wide range of backgrounds and careers, men and women, kind of like from very professional ranks down to, fairly common blue collar ranks and others. And that forum group had quite a role to play in in reading the material as it was coming out through those years, asking questions, and then seeing what comes from those questions. It was kind of like a back and forth exchange for quite a number of years until the information had been communicated in completeness. And then the what was called the Urantia Foundation was formed in 1950 with the intention to publish this information as a book. And then in 1955, it actually was published and was the first edition was released. So that headquarters where the Urantia Foundation is located and where the communications occurred is in this small mansion in Chicago. So a couple years ago, I went back there for my first time to meet with the people who are there, who maintain the property, and who still, there's a small group there who meets occasionally or maybe on a weekly basis to discuss the information. And they were able to give me a lot of information about the background. I was able to see the library, a lot of the photos and things of people who were early associated with this, and just had an amazing time. It was really, really great. I really welcomed the reception they gave me. They knew I was intensely interested and serious about this, and they rose to the occasion to give me the type of tour and the information that they could tell I was legitimately seeking. So it was really good.
Now, when you look back at all the religious texts and scriptures throughout the world, it seems to be the same version of the story, just told differently, but a diluted version throughout every different ancient text and writing. But the Urantia book seems to bring it all together and brings so much detail into it, and gives a greater understanding. And it seems that there was this, I guess you could say, one world type of spiritual practice or belief that used to exist.
Yeah, that's a keen observation on your part here, Chris. So I'm going to give you my perspective on this, and I will try to differentiate and remember to differentiate between what is, Joel Garbon's thoughts and opinions versus what the celestial authors of the material say. Okay, so as I mentioned, they claim to be, these celestial beings from many different planets, including beings from this planet who have been here ever since the beginning of human civilization and even earlier. So they have been witnesses to the history of this planet and the rise of humanity from animal origins through the whole, evolutionary process. And they have observed history as it's unfolded here, including how primitive man practiced his original natural religion, which they would call, the word that they use for that is evolutionary religion, as opposed to revealed religion. So as the evolutionary religions are happening, it's pretty much unfolds the way we would expect. Primitive man worshiped nature, worshiped, lightning, plants, animals, stones, mountains, volcanoes, all these things in the natural world that were very impressive and sometimes fear-inspiring or awesome to them. They also were were very curious and fearful of what happens when their family members and friends die. And all of a sudden, this animated body suddenly has no animation at all. And it had an inherent sense that something went out of it, and they thought of these things in terms of ghosts, and that, like, okay, where did that go? And is it still lingering around? They always had a sense it was still somehow associated with the body. And so they were very afraid of this concept of ghosts and spirits and things like that. So later religion evolved as a type of ghost cults or spirit cults, things like that, and it just kind of progressed on like that over very long periods of time. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of years. And what the celestial authors of the Urantia book say is that it wasn't until about 500,000 years ago that the first instances of revealed religion happened, and that was associated with the arrival on this planet of a planetary administrator, a very high order being who was sent to this planet along with a staff of other beings with the mission to teach human beings and advance human culture on this planet in a lot of basic ways to begin with. So that would be teaching agriculture, basic industry like metalworking, pottery making, animal husbandry, the basics of hygiene, the basics of home building, the basics of culture from the standpoint of governance, family, how do you live with civility instead of savagery, things like this. And then they also imparted the earliest teachings of revealed religion. And this is coming from the understanding that these advanced celestial beings have of the origin, nature, and history of the universe at large, including its creator. So they are bringing information about what we might call God. And they imparted relatively simple teachings about God and the created universe. And they were only enough to really make an impression on the primitive man's mind, basic things. But you might say they were kind of like the rudiments of what later became known as the Ten Commandments. So just kind of simple instructions here. And that was about all that could be handled at that time by the primitive man. But that administration from that planetary administrative being went along quite normally, because this is a normal process that happens, they say, on any inhabited planet where the evolutionary life has resulted in the arise of human beings from animal origins. That it is normal for, at a certain stage in the primitive human progress, there's the arrival of this planetary administrator being and the staff that goes along with that. And so on our planet, apparently that went along pretty well for about 300,000 years. And it started from the headquarters world, or the headquarters capital of that administrative being and staff, which they said was located in the Persian Gulf. And what they would do is they would bring to that headquarters city all of the best and brightest from the surrounding tribes and races. And they would educate them there at the headquarters. And after they had imparted a good deal of this kind of basic education for advancing culture, they would send those best and brightest humans back to their tribes as ambassadors so that they could teach. And then again, this kept going in successive waves and started to radiate out to a greater diameter of influence of the primitive human culture that was, surrounding this first capital on our planet. Then apparently something went awry, where they said there was a rebellion within our local system of planets, and that the rebellion occurred at a very high level. Basically, the administrator being of a whole system of nearly 600 inhabited planets, ours being only one of those 600 some, that being went into rebellion against the universal administration. And there were devastating consequences that were, that impinged on that rebellion. And it resulted in the quarantine of not only our planet, but apparently, more than 30 other planets in our local system of worlds. So now we were just essentially cut off from what apparently are the normal lines of communication that exist between inhabited planets. And there's, as they speak of it, there routinely is travel between various beings to all different kinds of planets, but under the quarantine situation, that all, now was suddenly abridged and not available. There was a lot of chaos that went on, not only in the celestial realms here, but the great progress in culture that had been imparted over those 300,000 years, to the point where there were cities with megalithic structures and technology, and humans were progressing to a fairly high state of civilization. All of that went into retrograde. And so now man, who had become fairly sophisticated and noble, went back into a state of barbarism and savagery, and what had been learned became lost. So there was a catastrophic loss of knowledge that had occurred with this rebellion. And there's many, many other fascinating details that go along with it. But it makes a lot of sense when we go back and we find that increasingly archaeologists, as they go and they explore and they dig, they uncover their findings. Well, what keeps happening? They keep pushing back the dates for when there apparently was sophisticated, advanced human culture. Well, if this rebellion that we spoke of occurred, as they say, 200,000 years ago, and that at that point, 200,000 years ago, there was high culture among humans, including cities and technology and all this. Well, that says, what we've been finding in archaeology so far, which is kind of just taking us back to maybe, 10,000, 10,000 BC, let's say, for Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey and some of these other sites, but knowing of earlier human dwellings with much lesser sophistication going back some tens of thousands of years, what it says is there's tons more to uncover. There's all kinds of archaeological opportunities that are going to be out there. Much of it supposedly submerged beneath the Eastern Mediterranean and in that Persian Gulf area and off the coast of India. That's where most of the most incredible finds are likely going to be located.
Now, when you were speaking of the being that rebelled, would this be the same story of Lucifer?
Yes. So they do give names. They don't hesitate to give names and clarification for who these beings are. So the way the authors of the Urantia book describe it, Lucifer was a high-level being who was essentially the administrator of our local system of approximately 600 planets. And that his administration went along, very well and very normally for someone who had the trust that had been imparted to him by the universe administrator. And but there came a time where things were going awry in his mind. He was starting to demonstrate a lot of what you might call signs of insubordination, and a degree of egoic pride, and a real restlessness with what they refer to as the divine plan of evolutionary progression, which a key element of that plan for our level, for our human level, is that despite us starting at these very low animal origin beginnings, that we gradually evolve and ascend and progress to levels of spiritual understanding and experiential glory that goes way past the order of being at which Lucifer was. And that this apparently aggravated him to such a degree that he just could not stand the thought of these lowly humans, pathetic as we were and may still are, I guess, that we would somehow be part of a divine plan that had us bypassing him and going on to much, much greater heights of universal understanding and experience. And there's good reason for why all that plan has our order of being doing that. But anyway, Lucifer rebellion is what they called it. They said it impacted this whole local system. It occurred over not just in an instant, but over some fairly protracted period of years. But basically, what happened was that on 30 some inhabited planets, the planetary administrator being also joined the rebellion, and ours did from this planet as well. And they give a name to that being. They say his name was Caligastia. Now, people also say, well, okay, so are Lucifer and Satan, are they the same thing, or what's going on? And the authors are very clear in saying, no, Lucifer, Satan, those are two different beings. They have a relationship from the standpoint that while Lucifer was the head administrative being for our local system of 600 some worlds, his first lieutenant essentially was Satan. And Satan had more interaction with our planet because part of his role was to go and to visit the various inhabited planets on various assignments of administration and things like that. So he was well acquainted with our world, and the celestial beings here were well acquainted with him. But anyway, he was able to essentially recruit Caligastia, our planetary administrator, to join the rebellion, under the promise that Caligastia would essentially be God of the earth. And they say the celestial name for our planet Earth is called Urantia. And the name itself means our place in the heavens. But anyway, this is how they describe what happened here, and it resulted in planetary havoc for the human race and for culture itself, and caused a lot of problems for other celestial orders who were essentially trapped here on our planet because of the quarantine. And there were rebellions and defaults that happened in those other celestial realms as well. For instance, many of the angels, in fact, apparently the majority of the angelic beings that were here, also went into the rebellion because they could not conceive of a brilliant administrator like Caligastia of being able to make such a gross error as to join something that was awry. So they trusted him, basically. So they went along and got pulled into that. And there were other orders of being too, where there was quite a bit of losses due to the rebellion. So it was a sad state of affairs on all levels, and had dire consequences to human culture and was the primary reason for the loss of all this knowledge that we had accumulated for 300,000 years and that we have never recovered since. And the implications here and the consequences have been, why we continue to have, racial strife, why we continue to be so ridiculously violent, why we have so many religions of various beliefs, so many of which, if not all, that are not consistent or coherent or comprehensive as far as how they explain origins, history, and destiny. So there's a lot of clashes between religions and all these things that we're so familiar with. And not the least of which is the fact that the human lifespan and our susceptibility to illness and things like this, many of these things do not exist at all on other planets that were not involved in the rebellion, and that have continued to progress along according to the normal plan. Had we been one of those planets, we would be so far in advance of where we are right now that this planet would be practically unrecognizable. So it's, it was a disastrous undertaking that happened to us.
Now, also, a good portion of the book talks about the life and teachings of Jesus. What can you tell us about that differs from, the biblical teachings of Jesus?
Yes. So probably fully, more than a fourth of the book is devoted to the life and teachings of Jesus and who he is, what his role and mission was, and where do we come into play with this being called Jesus. First thing they say is that part of the way the universal administration of worlds occurs is that there are various levels of creator beings and administrative beings. There's a level called the creator sons and the creator mother spirits that are jointly responsible for the creation and organization of what they call a local universe. A local universe is a sector of space-time that has millions of stars in it and perhaps billions of planets, but that eventually is to be inhabited with up to about 10 million inhabited planets. And an inhabited planet is defined as a planet where the evolutionary life has progressed to the point where humans have arisen on it. So it's only considered inhabited when the human order of life has arisen on the planet. And our order of being is described as evolutionary will creatures, meaning that we have a free will prerogative to make moral choices and to know God, to know our Creator. So the Creator Son, the creative spirit who create the beings that inhabit their local universe, there are certain things that are required of the Creator Son before he can have what they would call complete sovereignty over the universe of his own making. And one of those requirements is that he is required to essentially incarnate on 7 different orders of his beings, of the beings that he's created. So for instance, a creator son would be required to essentially appear as an angel on an angelic level, on the level of the administrator beings, like what Lucifer and Satan were at, and other orders as well. But he's required to have these actual life experiences as a being on 7 different orders of being. The final and lowest experience is the incarnation as a human being. and that each creator son is required to do this. And when he completes that seventh, what they call a bestowal, each of these are 7 bestowals, that after the final bestowal in a life as a flesh and blood human being, and he completes that mission successfully, then he is granted sovereignty over the local universe of his own making. They say that the creator son of our local universe incarnated on this planet as Jesus of Nazareth. There's a lot of detail that goes into the narrative about this, such startling detail. It essentially gives a history of the life of Jesus from even before he was born. It gives kind of the genealogy of his parents, what the times were like on our planet, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean area, and in Palestine and all that. What the Jewish culture was like at the time in great detail, and then it details essentially his life as an infant, and each year all the way through his whole life in just amazing detail. And it provides so much of a consistent and coherent tapestry of who this person was and is, what his role and mission was, what his teachings were, and what they were meant to result in. It makes sense. It makes such profound sense to anyone who reads it, studiously and seriously, as I have, I know many others have. And it's interesting, Chris. When I'm going to go speak at this UFO Mega Conference in Laughlin in next month in February, and the topic of my presentation is there a universal religion among the advanced inhabited planets? And much of that talk is going to be based on the information that's contained in the Urantia book. And one of the challenging things in speaking to an audience of many hundreds face to face on the topic of religion is that religion just strikes the nerves in just about everybody for one reason or another, and the name Jesus strikes a lot of those nerves as well, or even more deeply for various reasons. But the Urantia book just unabashedly calls it out from the standpoint of these celestial beings who are just saying, like, look, we've witnessed all of this from the beginning history of your own planet and through the beginning of human beings appearing on the planet and all through your civilization's history. We were there, we saw it, and we're giving you our account, and we're giving you our understanding of what this all is. And it's just done in such an articulate and I would say, as I said, a pretty high level way. This isn't little kind of fairy tale stuff that you read to your kids. This is written at a collegiate or master's level, and but anyway, it's really impressed me from the standpoint of the comprehensiveness of the material and its consistency, and as I said, its coherence. It makes sense. It makes sense.
When you look back at ancient human history, we used to have open contact with these celestial beings. It seemed we had a lot more open contact. And things, like you said, just stopped. We lost all this knowledge at some point. Do you see this ever returning? Do you see us ever getting back to an age where we can communicate with these beings again, and we will get back some of this lost knowledge that we used to have?
Well, it appears that some of that is happening now, right? With all the contactee testimonies that there are, and I believe that many have had actual contact with various celestial beings. The material in the Urantia book itself says, yeah, absolutely, there will be increasing interaction between beings from other planets on a visible level, on a relational level. And that is part of the normal transaction of culture and commerce, in the universe. That things aren't, the way things are so disordered on our planet are not the norm. We were taken off track to such a serious degree, and we are now such a confused, beleaguered little world that we can't even comprehend the way things have progressed on normal worlds, and where interaction and actual like daily broadcasts from the universe headquarters to each planet, and kind of like what's going on the much larger stage, that's commonplace. And what it leads to is this breakdown of judgment, not only within our own order of being, that on this world we have so many judgments between ourselves and people who live in other countries or speak another language or have a different skin color or a different religion, or they might just be our neighbor. We don't like the way they wash their car. We have so many different judgments. But on these other planets, they have been educated and enculturated to see a brotherhood among, first, their own order of being, the human order. They come to understand and experience and live authentically the brotherhood of man. And then they extend that increasingly to the brotherhood of all created beings, that we are all the children of God. And of course, this was a primary message of Jesus. His primary message was to be a representative, to be the incarnation of the love and mercy of God, and to teach the reality of the brotherhood of man, because we are all the children of the divine. And we have a divine inheritance awaiting us as part of our divine destiny, should we choose it. It's not automatic. It's not imposed on us. There's nothing at all about how the divine relates to our order of being. There's nothing at all about it that is coercive or that compels us or commands us. It is simply offered to us. And we have various celestial influences, including guardian angels who are with us, who they say are very real and extremely important in the human life and the human progression forward. Beings such as those angels, they're continuously nudging us to experience and embrace truth and beauty and goodness, which they describe as the divine qualities. And that is, we more consistently and more frequently choose these experiences of truth, beauty, and goodness, that we will start to grow a reality of our own that is the human soul, that it's actually an evolving reality that becomes increasingly real with those choices of truth, beauty, and goodness. And which is to say that those same choices are identical with choosing the will of God. It's not like there's some big bearded being up here who's beating on us that, you got to obey me, obey me, obey me. It's not at all like that. It's consistent choices of truth and beauty and goodness, which move us forward. They progress us in our own reality. We become more real, and we become much more endowed with spiritual reception, much more likely to receive direct communication from spirit, from deity to us in a very personal way. And it's what you encounter when you see people who you might say, that person is spirit touched. They really have something going on. You could tell it by the person. And these people are good people. You could tell they're good people. They're just tremendously motivated to discover, uncover more truth. They want to have understanding. They want to be of high service on this planet. You know, they are loving people. They're trying to minister. They believe that there is a loving, beneficent God. They believe that it makes sense that there's a brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. And it's not surprising that their spiritual perception and receptivity has blossomed along with that. So
Now, when you're talking about angels and spirituality, and then you look at UFO research, I'm very disappointed in some of this UFO research lately because I don't think they're connecting dots. I believe that the metaphysical, paranormal, UFOs, extraterrestrials, spiritual beings, angels, I think it's all connected. And, these fields of research, they keep each other separated. They don't communicate with each other enough. And I think that if they came together and started researching this as a whole phenomenon, that we could learn so much more about it. What are your thoughts on that?
well, yeah, I think that's a great insight, Chris. There is a lot of turf protection in the ufology field, just like in any field of research. And the development of ego is on fertile territory, in any realm of research. And I would say it's very typical in human observation that as people become more expert, more recognized, that there is a temptation toward becoming, more prideful, maybe even more arrogant, and very defensive about one's own research. And I see this in the science field all the time. I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of very, very, very knowledgeable scientists, some of some renown as well, and have observed these traits. And I've always been very curious that, people who are very, very intelligent, who aren't willing to look at the data of somebody else, they become very closeted and dogmatic about their own research, and they feel very threatened when there's something else that essentially is a new discovery. And I find that very intellectually dishonest from a science level, anyway, because of course science is meant to be the pursuit of truth. And so when it happens in the field of ufology, it's not surprising. This seems to be the human nature here. But one of the things that I love about the Urantia material is it shows the harmony between all of these orders you mentioned. So whether it's the angelic level, other spiritual beings, whether they are they might just be advanced human beings on other planets who have technology to travel the universe. It might be beings in between. It might be beings that just are solely of mind nature with no material nature at all, and all kinds of things in between. The Urantia book speaks of all of that, and it speaks of how they were created. It speaks of what their roles and missions are. It speaks of where do they hail from. There's so much intense detail about this that I believe reading this material seriously, and it's a heavy study, 2,000 pages, and it would take, I would say the average human would take at least a year to read it all with any type of comprehension at all. And like I've been reading it for 15 years, others who I study with, some of them up to 50 years, they've been reading the material. So I'm just a neophyte at 15 years. But I have increasingly been encouraging my contacts in the UFO research field to read the Urantia book, because I think it can help inform them in their own field of research. And I just said, and I just tell them, I said, you will find it self-evident if you were to do that. because if you're doing the archaeological part, you'll find so much information about the archaeology. It might even pinpoint where you should be looking. If you're looking at how do you harmonize the philosophy that we're hearing from the testimony of contactees, how we harmonize that with the science aspect. That's in there too. How do we harmonize where are they coming from physically? Where are these planets located, such and such, or such things as a planetary rebellion, because that's not a new theme either. It's certainly been embedded in the world religions for thousands of years. I'm not just saying Judaism or Christianity. The idea of a rebellion is all over this. Demons and angels and demiurges and beings of light, all that kind of thing. I mean, it's all over the place. So there's something for everybody to learn and to advance their own research, I believe, in reading this. Even if you just read it like read it like a novel. But as you read it like a novel, pretty quick you're going to say, I don't know any human novelist of this skill and this knowledge base and this wisdom. Because even if you took out all of the science references or anything about orders of being, any of that stuff, there is so much wisdom that hits you on the side of the head and in the heart throughout the book. It's just nothing like it I've found in my experience.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. For the last few minutes that we have, why don't you tell us more about the new energy movement and some of the research and developments that are going on right now?
So the New Energy Movement is a nonprofit that was founded back in 2003. And I was part of that first group who came together to form the organization and served as its second president, and then for 11 years. And then a couple of years ago, I handed over the reins to the new president, Susan Manowich. And what we have done with the organization over all these years is execute a mission that is largely to educate about what's going on behind the scenes in breakthrough energy technologies. And we also have served as advocates for the inventor community who are working on these breakthrough technologies. Many of the inventors, if not all of them, have labored for very long times in what I would say are very compromised conditions, both from the standpoint of funding for their research, or sometimes, even like trying to keep, destructive forces from disrupting their research once they demonstrate that they actually have something that's of significant impact, and kind of all things in between, because being an inventor, and I am one, so I know what it takes to go from the idea on the back of a napkin to a fully successful commercial technology. There's so many stages in between where to bring resources to the inventor community is a very, very valuable service, and we've tried to perform that well. So there's a number of inventors who I've interacted with over the years and continue to, and a number of discrete projects that I'm working on, some in confidence, to help with the resourcing of technologies of promise, and to try to help get the inventor on on a track that is sustainable. So it's been a fascinating ride, and I would say in some ways, because of what I've been able to witness over the years, it's like work, looking behind the wizard's curtain, kind of seeing, what's going on. And it's been quite an education for me, and there's been, as I said before, about science in general, it's been interesting to see how egos interplay. If suddenly you feel like from your research, you've invented something that will make oil obsolete, the temptations that go along with that in the mind of an inventor are immense. And I've watched some take themselves down because of the personality distortion that occurred. And these are people who had real working technologies. All right. It's a real problem. One of the things that I always try to do with the inventors is to encourage them to rediscover their humble gene. and try to remind them, so many of them would say that they were given a vision or a download or what have you. So they know that the ideas aren't originating in themselves. It's actually information that's come to them. And I would say probably the majority of them definitely believe there's extraterrestrial life and believe that, that it's been visiting here for some time. And that there is technology and ideas and things like that are being seeded here. So to have them remember that these ideas have been gifted to them, to maintain the humility about that experience, and don't all of a sudden think that you should be the Bill Gates of free energy or something like that, because that's a pretty blind path to go down, and it's taken a number of folks down with it.
Now, are there any new energy technologies that you can talk about? Maybe something we could look forward to in the near future?
Well, I think that there's a few classifications of technology rather than speaking about any particular inventor. The class of technology that's come to be known as cold fusion does have some real promise to it. It's been very slow in developing over the years because there's been a lot of dissension about the theory of how it actually occurs. How do you end up getting excess heat from these combinations of common materials? Oftentimes, heavy water and the application of some current through the water, through electrolysis processes, things like that, and other processes where they might be heating up hydrogen gas in the presence of various catalysts like nickel and some other things. And a number of those have been described in the literature, and some of them even have gotten very high levels of funding and things like that. But that cold fusion field in general, that will eventually result in some commercial technologies. Some think it's going to happen within, 3 years, 5 years, a decade, but it has advanced to the point where it's very repeatable, and it's definitely over unity in that you're getting more energy out from the apparent energy input going into the process. That's not to say energy is being created. It's just that, there are forms of energy that we're not very good at measuring that become manifest in the process in forms that we can readily use, like light or heat or mechanical power or electrical power, So that's one realm of technology. There are others that are plasma-based that show quite a bit of promise. I had worked with one researcher for a few years on that, and it was very exciting to see some of that technology. So there'll be plasma-based technologies. There's some others that are based on principles of magnetism, magnetic motors. People might hear about that at times. And also there's some solid state, magnetic devices. Solid state meaning there's no moving parts, but they might be using a type of switching of current with a microprocessor in ways that allows electricity to be extracted from it. There's some other mechanical power type of devices that are using novel applications of compressed air or compressed water that have found that there's principles of geometry and acceleration of fluid that can result in an over-unity effect as well. And like some of those technologies trace their roots back to a well-known Austrian researcher named Victor Schauberger. So some of those are going to be coming out too, perhaps even sooner than the cold fusion technologies. So anyway, that's kind of a handful, small handful of some of these. So there's stuff going on. It's there definitely are quite a few different over Unity technologies on this planet right now that are in processes of development and eventual commercialization. So of that, I can say for a fact, because I have experienced several of those. So, you know, they are there. But of course, for every one of those, there's probably 100 frauds or hoaxes out there.
Right.
So be discerning.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much, Joel, for coming by tonight. Before you head out, let everyone know where they can find your work.
Well, I think that what I would best recommend right now is if you're interested in the new energy field and those comments I made about that, go to newenergymovement.org, newenergymovement.org, and you can see things on that website and what the mission is. There's also a lot of videos and things, some conference presentations. You can also Google my name, Joel Garbon, and you can find some things there. But I also, for the folks who are interested in the discussion about the Urantia material and what the value of that is for, I think, all areas of human study to increase understanding, you can go to a number of different websites. The one I like the most, it's just simply called truthbook.com, truthbook.com. And you can listen online to the book being read. You can find all different kinds of historical research about the book and all different topics that it addresses. There's a lot of really cool videos in there, including videos about the cosmology that the book describes. Some of them are really very professional and beautifully done. So that's a great place to start, truthbook.com. Or you can just go, you type in Urantia, Urantia. You'll find all kinds of things there. One thing I would caution you against, though, because the material is very controversial, especially in the world of conventional mainstream religion, you will find a lot of naysayers of the Urantia material here. But what I have found consistently is that those who are criticizing it, especially the ones who criticize it most vehemently, have not read it. It's just like getting someone being a critic of a movie who's never seen the movie. It's absurd. Okay, so bear that in mind and do your own research and come to your own conclusions.
Very good. Well, thank you so much again, Joel. Look forward to seeing you in February, and you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you too, brother. Take care, Chris.